All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rook community meeting for November 15th, 2022. We'll go ahead and get started with the agenda here with the milestone checkup. Well, first of all, for the 1.9 release, we did have a patch release 1.9.13 almost 2 weeks ago now. And it did include a couple little security fixes as far as the crash collector pod running less privileged. And then I think also just getting the latest binary for the S5 command tool. Yeah, so here's the release notes. So running the crash collector as F user and update S5 command, which I don't know of any issues with S5 command other than some security scan was complaining about an older version. Yep. So for 1.9, we don't currently have another release planned for it. It's certainly possible depending on what comes up in the future, but I think we're looking pretty stable for 1.9. Any comments on 1.9? All right, then for 1.10, we also at the same time had a 1.10.5 release with those same security releases and a number of other fixes. Let's see if I just glance at the release notes real quick. Yep, a number of things backported. Let's see, anything worth mentioning here for the recording. Let's see. Yeah, updated to the latest Ceph release 17.2.5, some doc updates, some other minor things. But I guess nothing stands out for me to mention so much. For 1.10.6, we'll plan on that this Thursday for our biweekly cadence. Keep that and get a few fixes out there for just on that cadence. I don't think there's really anything of interest to look at in the project board. Honestly, I missed looking at it this week to make sure we're up to date. So I should probably do that and see if we need to move anything out to 1.11 at this point. So yeah, a couple of these would still be nice to fix in 1.10 if we can get to them. So we'll see on those. All right, anybody else have comments on 1.10?
Nope.
All right. Moving on then, 1.11, no real updates on my side. Still planning on around mid-January probably for that release. How's the project board looking? I've got a few things added here. I guess as we're working on new features that will stay in master for now, please just make sure they're tagged for the 1.11 board. All right, and that's all I have for planned releases. Anything else, anybody? All right, go ahead. For the topic section, KubeCon retrospective. So Alex, I think you were the only one in the group here that made it. So curious for your feedback on how the booth went or other things there related to Rook.
Yeah, it was nice meeting anyone there. Anyone that was there.
Seeing people in person is nice.
Yeah, in person. Well, there isn't too much to say. Like we had like a small kiosk booth. It was only part-time. We were able to get to give out quite a lot of. Well, they're a bit aged now, but 5-year anniversary Rook T-shirts. So there's that.
Did all those get given away?
Not all. We had quite some with size S small left, but
okay.
Like, well,
yeah.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Well,
and the booth and part-time. Do you feel like the part-time booth worked well? Did they like take down the Rook sign when it wasn't our hours, or how did that work?
It was then changed to, I think,
something
with
else.
Helm, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Okay.
Which I think to put it more or less into that perspective, that we were basically 2 people. It was good that it wasn't a full-time booth.
Because it's you and Mike. Did Annette help at the booth much?
Well, Mike Paris mainly, yeah. Annette, I think, like for like some time as well. Mainly it was Mike and me basically. So, but as it was good that it was only half time.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say to the virtual talk. I was at the booth at the time.
Right. Well, I was going to say for the virtual talk too, I didn't join virtually because
okay.
I don't did it. Blaine, you probably didn't either, or I think last time we joined during a virtual talk, there was nothing, no questions, like nothing to do. So.
Okay.
So I don't know what happened this time. Yeah. Sorry, Blaine, you said you weren't either there.
Yeah, I didn't join either.
Okay. Well, sounds good. Thanks for the update, Alex, on that.
Yep.
Alrighty, yeah. In future KubeCon, I guess we'll see how it goes as far as how many people will get there to see if we do full-time booth or part-time again. So we shall see. Let's see, Amsterdam. Is it in May? When is it on the calendar?
May or April, I think.
Okay.
I'll Google it in a second.
Yeah. So,
oh, April 17th to 21st April.
Got it.
21 April.
Yep. Fingers crossed that can be all normal and in person and all that, and no more virtual talks.
Yeah.
Alrighty. At least I'm tired of virtual talks. Much more interesting in person.
You were the one that didn't join us in Detroit.
I know, it's my fault. You guys were there.
Oh.
So.
No.
All right. That's all for that. A couple small items on the agenda to just bring up real quick. So this SNCC security scan is failing due to something, a CVE that's already fixed in Rook. I just mentioned that in Huddle a few minutes ago, but just to reiterate here, there's a link to it there. And need to figure out how to resolve that so our scan turns green again. But yeah, it's just a tool issue since we know it's already fixed. The next topic I put in the agenda there is just thinking about the community and questions on Slack and GitHub. And I just want to ask people's thoughts on how can we spread the load. I enjoy spending time there answering questions, and so I tend to maybe take on too much there. But I think it just to get time zone coverage or make sure people can see multiple people answering questions, I think it's just healthier for the community if I'm not the main one answering questions all the time. So like people will tag me and to answer the question. Well, there's other people who can answer the questions too. So I think if we can spread somehow, I've never felt like there's a good way to spread the load without making it an assignment and then it's just a pain to track who's assigned or whatever. I don't know. What are other people's thoughts on how we kind of pay attention to Slack and GitHub issues? Yeah, is it something we just need to remember to do? Is it? I don't know.
I'm currently hoping that that I can get Gaurav to help on the Slack more. From our side, basically, to put it like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Or like maybe just as I think we kind of had, I think I initially tried talking about that some time ago already, but it's like, it still feels like Slack isn't really the right tool to help people because if we are using threads then, and at least if you help 3 people at the same time, it's just, or it's a mix between, hey, yeah, can you run this? no response for like a week or even a month or something. Someone comes back like, oh yeah, here's the open. It's like, what
Yeah,
was this
there's definitely that.
again? Like when? And other times where like you immediately get a response, or it's just like, I don't know, it's a bit like it still feels a Slack, even with like the real-time communication there isn't really the right thing there, but I wouldn't really know an alternative that would involve that would not involve us switching to like a different communication tool that is not Slack.
Right. Okay, and we have other communication means like the GitHub discussions, the GitHub issues.
Yeah, but sometimes like these are then not real time enough like that.
Exactly.
Like if
So
that's the problem, then like it's like I guess just just like real time enough, but it's just when you don't use a thread, which I hope everyone uses Slack threads, but it's still a bit.
mhm.
I don't know. It's just as you kind of, I guess, imply with that as well. It's like it's getting not unorganized, but it's like getting all over the place. The more people you try to help at the same time, because again, like you'll respond, and then either 5 minutes later or a week later, you're getting a response like, what is going on, basically, depending on when the response is.
Yeah, but I feel like as far as the tool, I mean, there are other tools like at Red Hat, we have Gchat, and I find it way more annoying than Slack. So I don't know that it would help even to try and find another chat tool if we just assume let's keep Slack. And yes, it's annoying how it's organized. But I think any sort of real-time chat tool is going to have that feel of not so much organization.
Maybe just as I've
Mm.
used it in the past, Solib is quite, apart, sorry. I've used Solib in the past, and it has this full threading. Everything is a thread technically model, which helps with like, especially with like time zone independent work to pull like that.
Mhm.
But it would be a new tool basically. Like it's
And Parth?
Yeah, just on my opinion, like I usually go to GitHub issues and see what I can do. But for Slack, majorly I find some difficulties in saying that like there are lots of messages at the end, like if I go and open one channel. But most of the times it's helpful, like whenever someone or you like add me or tag me there, then I go and try to spend more time. So maybe as a starting, maybe you can try like tagging different people like us and others. So I guess it would be more better.
Yeah. And that's fair. And I think it's totally fine if some people find responding on GitHub easier, or if some people like Slack easier. Yeah. It's where it is ultimately an upstream community where we don't have a commitment to go respond in a certain timeline or anything. It's just, I just want to make sure we're finding ways, especially as maintainers, to kind of figure out how to keep the community going as part of that maintainer role. So maybe, yeah, let's think about it. It's just something on my mind. I don't have a formal solution. I hope we don't need a formal solution.
Yep.
Anybody else have any ideas?
with the current tool, not really.
Yeah, honestly, I find it would be really difficult to switch tools, even if it is marginally better. Or
We kind of have the same problem at Kuro right now as well, where it's like I would love to use Solid because I said like I used it in the past and I love it because it's basically
more organized.
like using like email threading model of like messaging, which helps with like exactly this different time zone thing and all that. But the problem, at least for example for us, is that at least we, for example, use Slack Connect and so on, which there's no like Slack Connect to Solid basically, which is like expected. But
Yeah,
I don't think there's really a way to do that. maybe one idea would be to either, I don't necessarily want to say force more moderation, but at least, I guess, kind of like there's still a lot of like as like Rook is focusing on purely Ceph at the moment. It's still that there's quite some questions of like general discussions in a general channel, as an example, where it's like, hey, I have this Ceph issue. Like, can you please use the Ceph channel, basically, kind of like this? Yeah, I don't know. Like it's. If that might make sense to, I guess, force people into the correct channels, depending on what the issue is.
Yeah, and anymore, since it's really Ceph is our only storage provider, there's, I think if people use, all of the channels are sort of equal in my head, like general or Ceph. And sometimes I'll point people to Ceph CSI channel to, if they have CSI specific questions. One thing I do, I think I've mentioned this before in the community meeting, is just if somebody posts in multiple channels, I'll answer in one channel and then just delete the other ones. I won't even mention it. Just, yeah, just to discourage people from doing it. I'll just delete it.
But you have to see it like this. Not everyone can delete messages. For example, I just checked I can't delete messages as an, example as well. Yeah, so
we should figure out how to get more people that ability.
Yeah.
So okay. Sounds good. Yeah, I'm not sure who all is marked as like an owner of the Slack space. I know I am, so I'll look at that.
Yeah, let's check it up as a action item. Could you edit?
Yeah.
I hope I have it open, but I don't. Where is it? Because at least for me, I guess that's, I think the most infuriating part there is this really like this, hey, I need help, and then in other channels it's like, so, you know, you help the one person, or at least throw them the question, and then 5 seconds later it's like, wait, didn't I just
already help them?
Help you? Where? And yeah, well.
Exactly. Okay. Any more thoughts about Slack, or we can move on?
Not really. We could maybe look into like using some apps or something that I guess force people to use like threads, or like auto create threads if that's even possible. But I don't know if something like apps for that exist. So
yeah, I feel like we should keep it in Slack unless there's a huge reason to move. So okay. Well, with that, let's move on. And so, Alex, I think the bulk of our meeting will be your topic. So let me just skip real quick to the one Jared added, and then we'll come back to you. So he forwarded an email that someone sent him directly, I guess something about some issue they're having. So I'll just respond to that, or if needed, ask them to open an issue or whatever. But I haven't looked at that yet. So anyway, that's all for that one. I don't know the details of it either. So Alex, for your presentation, do you want to share your screen, or I can just do it here?
Share your screen. I can't share my screen with Zoom on Linux.
Oh, that's not the right one. Okay.
Yeah, so this is still pretty rough at certain aspects. Yeah, it's like the idea is to, well, improve cloud nativeness. More or less, it's more of like a, I guess, the Kubernetes integration there of Ceph components / Rook into this whole ecosystem. Next slide, please. On at least how I see it, I kind of see it as like a 3-point plan, where like as a if you go to slideshow, I think it might make it just to the start. But yeah, let's just.
Can you still see that?
Yeah, we can still. Okay, please, I can still see it. Anyone? Okay. Garth, maybe Park.
Since I was just sharing the browser window, I wasn't sure. In presentation mode.
It works.
Okay, great.
You know how it goes, it just works. But sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, so kind of the idea would be to like, instead of I guess allowing local disk or like instead of directly, for example, accessing like a dev SDA, the operator, for example, would, or like some mechanism that would be up for discussion as well, would create like a persistent volume for those disks, or even like put LVM or something on it before this would be like propagated to Kubernetes in like the native way with Kubernetes, persistent volumes in Kubernetes, so that the Rook operator or like everything around it as well, if like preparing an OSD, would just need to, well, focus on how it's done with a PVC, because technically then everything is just the PVC. So there's quote unquote only one way for OSD to be created, at least in regards to like what the underlying storage is. The second point is that,
or maybe before you move on, can we maybe talk about each of these
Sure,
in detail
yeah.
a bit?
Sure.
Yeah, so
If there's some more detailed points as well further down the line on the slides. It's
okay, so
yeah,
maybe give an
let's-
overview and we'll move on to other sites. Sure.
okay, then yeah, second point is basically about like adding like something else, like a Ceph OSD resource, as I think one of the most prominent ones, to Rook in some way, so that if you want the OSD that is running on a certain disk or something, or even that it's like a mirror more or less of what is in the Ceph cluster, that depends on like what way we would want to go down, is that you could technically use just kubectl to do like kubectl create manifest with like a Ceph OSD in, which targets a certain persistent volume, or even an existing PVC, and that will be then created. That we basically have like custom resource for that. We can do like at least something like kubectl get Ceph OSD, and we would at least have like a mirror of what is going on in the Ceph cluster of like, oh, OSD 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on, listed natively in Kubernetes. Third point, it's mainly about with kind of these resources or these custom resources, for example, of like Ceph OSD. The idea would be that we could move certain customizabilities to these objects, so that if some customer needs some special labels on this one specific OSD, or even some other more specific things, it's on like a Ceph OSD object instead of on like the, for example, with the Ceph cluster, I guess, being quite long, depending on how many options you or parameters you want to specify, and even if how detailed you want to go per node. This might be like a, I guess, also a bit of a, like splitting it up in regards to the resources we offer to the users, and also kind of as like a splitting up certain parts or like certain logics of the operator to be more independent of each other. Yeah.
Okay.
So for this kind of like with the PVCs, kind of, I guess, as a disclaimer on like the next slide as well, there are already projects that do that. The main idea is that simply we, for the first point on the plan, we would need something which would see disks and, well, represent them in some way in Kubernetes as like an object, or even immediately as a persistent volume, for a claim then to be made on this persistent volume to be used then as a, for example, for an OSD. That's just kind of at least how I thought about it, with like that you could have disks or in partitions and you see the class of them and so on. But as Travis next slide enlightened me, there are tools like Topo LVM and local storage operator LSO. So I think this is more or less like a, if we want to really go for like everything PVC or everything persistent volume, basically, what project to prefer to use there, or at least recommend to the users, if they're on bare metal. But in the end, we shouldn't like reinvent the wheel. Like, that's a good point from you there, Travis. Like, we shouldn't reinvent the wheel, basically. It's like, I wasn't aware of topo LVM and local storage operator there when I created the initial slide.
Mhm.
But again, it's like this, having something represented as like some even custom object, or at least as like a persistent volume that we can just access by creating a persistent volume claim then.
Yeah, and I mean, throughout the past couple of years, since we've added the storage class device sets, which is all about managing with PVs and PVCs under OSDs, right? So I mean, we've had discussions about, well, should we get away completely from the raw devices and try and convert everybody to the PVCs? And where I felt like, in my mind, it ended up is that, well, since we don't want to reinvent the wheel, we would be pulling in a dependent. It required dependency of top LVM or LSO or something similar.
Or at least something that creates PVs, maybe, to put it like that.
Right. So
Like
if we
could technically create them manually.
Yeah. So if we pull them in a dependency, and then that it would just come with a lot of challenges, like converting the clusters or pulling in this dependency where we don't have the dependency at all today. Yeah, so those were just some of the challenges. But I think Blaine may have some thoughts on that too, or since we've talked about it. But I don't know, Blaine, anything to add?
Nothing particular. I think like the general ideas sound good. I mean, I also know it's going to be a lot of churn to make those kind of changes.
Right.
To
So
be honest, to some degree, my hope would be that it's, for the most part, just creating the PVs and correctly matching them to like a Ceph OSD object, if you will. So, or like to the right claim and then to a Ceph OSD object. But it's like a
Yeah.
migration
like
will be interesting.
Conceptually, it is pretty simple. I think it is just a lot of parts with like complex interactions between them all, and then as you mentioned, also the migration, which, I mean, we have done OSD migrations before, and I think we have, like when we did file store to blue store, we required users to like delete OSDs one by one, if I remember right.
Yeah.
So that might end up kind of being a decent option. I do feel like some specialized tooling that might be important, like Topo LVM can very easily carve up disks and do stuff, but it may be useful to have something that is akin to like the what's it called, the discovery daemon, that is also aware of like how to check disks for whether or not they have like a Ceph system on them, like that know how to check for the blue store header effectively, as well as using standard Linux tools for determining whether the disk is in use and things like that, which could help with migration, or potentially could be used to like feed the idea of use all disks that are available.
Or even just select ones then. Like that would be ideal with like one Ceph OSD at the moment, object representing one OSD, so only one partition or disk in the end. Well, ignoring metadata devices and so on. I think metadata devices might be a challenge to implement in a good way.
Yeah.
But
yeah, being able to like identify that a disk has a blue store header and automatically like get that turned into a PV via like LSO or Topo LVM. I think we've determined that LSO probably isn't the right thing for the Rook project before.
Hmm.
Um,
Or maybe even just a discover daemon that uses like the current filters, if you can call it like that, to create, or then auto create like the PVs based on our matching, basically.
mhm.
Would be
Yeah.
maybe as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as a like, as a technical detail on the like side of this, I talked to Travis about this a bit ago when we were talking about the Cozy driver. I have found, at least for myself, when we like have to configure environment variables or like config map variables to control like CSI functionality,
Mhm.
it on the Ceph operator, or not the Ceph operator, on the Rook operator, it becomes really challenging. Like I know manipulating a YAML isn't much different, but there are a lot of good tools that help people like autofill YAML files when CRDs are defined. That I think if we're like changing stuff around this, like if we're like, oh, we can like sort of create or like reuse parts of the discovery daemon, I would also suggest that maybe we create a CRD for that. And even if we set up the system such that it is a, oh, I forget what the programming terminology is for this, but we basically just set it up so that Rook says if there are two of them, we just give an error, like there should be one and there should only ever be exactly one in the system, to help configure that daemon. Just because putting configurations on the operator starts to seem to just kind of blow up after dealing with everything like annotations and resources and etc.
Maybe to add for that, I guess as a like other projects have done it in like such a way. The Zalando Postgres operator, for example, has two ways where it either reads the configuration from a config map, or like for itself, like for the operator, it either reads it from a config map, or it reads it from like a CRD, which is, well, to some degree, just everything they ask if in the config map, they just put it into the CRD, but with more structure, which is, well, that's what a CRD is for, to have it more structured than one level of config map, basically.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and in the chat, I just put a link to an LVM operator, which it works with Topo LVM. The Topo LVM is basically just the CSI driver, right? For that you'd create the OSDs with on the PVs. But and this LVM operator, it's something we use downstream. I mean, it's open source, but we've only we haven't pushed a community for it, and so it's really just a downstream thing. But really, this is exactly what it does. It has CRDs that where you define what devices you want to consume for the OSDs, and then it creates PVs for them, and then Topo LVM will make it so you can deploy them. So yeah.
Regarding like CRs or like, well, CRDs and all that, it's like, yeah, I don't know, it would just feel cool in the end if you could do like kubectl get Ceph OSD, and you know, like you would get to see all the OSDs, and even if you're like, oh, what disk is my OSD using, you could just do like you can kind of do it already with like what Ceph is able to offer. So for example, this might be even something to implement on like the crew plugin side, like this, you know, with the custom status columns as well in Kubernetes, as we already use them for Ceph cluster. I don't know, you know, it's just something that would feel so cool to be able to run kubectl get Ceph OSD, and we could all them denote they're on which disk or what device class, and if I want to replace it or so, I would, I don't know, edit it and set like you will be replaced, and if I just like if the disk is removed, the system is automatically cleaning that up and waiting for like a new disk. And if a new disk is even added, that's like on the idea sheet later on as well as an idea, it would just automatically, oh, new disk, and magically heal itself basically again.
Yeah.
It's these
Well, I
ideas,
think-
I guess.
Yeah, well, I think like you said, if it's just like print the status, like show me the OSDs and what their device classes are and stuff, like the crew plugin could
Crew,
easily
yeah.
go get that status and print it out for sure. Or there's Ceph commands that can show all sorts of details. And the crew plugin could leverage that. And I mean, the operator already does a number of things to let you deploy OSDs automatically today based on the discovery daemon, and not with PVCs though, because right now, today the approach with storage class device sets is you tell us, well, how many OSDs do you want? So if you're adding a disk, that number has to be updated currently. Anyway, so yeah, there's certainly areas for improvement, but I think without completely redesigning how we deal with PVs, I think we can get a long ways, or maybe everything we need to do can be done with existing patterns. So that's my
Yeah, I don't know, like it's just like on, at least we currently envision it with like the current search distribution there, but the idea is that instead of like having, I guess, something that's just the Rook Ceph operator, something that's more or less just sitting on top and being like, oh, there's a new disk, Ceph OSD created, and like, so that it's more or less like just sitting on top and creating what is desired by the user, that like, oh, use every disk, oh, so every new disk is also just, oh, new disk, Ceph OSD object created, and so on. So yeah. I would maybe propose that we move on with the slides at this moment, just that we, I guess, get through with them, and not all of them are, I said, not everything there's fully thought out yet, but it's just like to, I guess, that we get through them more or less, and then we can just also talk more about discussions there, and then see if we might want to take some discussions also, I guess, offline from this meeting at the moment. You brought up the point, Travis, in regards to like CRDs versus crew plugin. As you like said, with that, even for like a get OSDs, we could have something like that in the crew plugin easily. That would, for example, then just call out to like Ceph OSD tree command, for example, or pass the list of deployments, the OSD deployments we have. It's just, I guess, a different way than to like, I guess, show this information potentially. When you like do kubectl get Ceph OSD versus you have the crew plugin installed, and at least how I see this with CRDs versus crew plugins, it's mainly about this. How can you deploy it? With CRDs, it's technically you just throw it into your like GitHubs or whatever tool, and it's taken care of. And for like running like a crew plugin create OSD command or something, that would need to be done like, well, manually by an admin normally. And like you could automate this like Ansible, and well, bash scripts are out there, but for most, I think it might be a bit of a like for like creating something, so like this, as you said, it like this desired state, it might be a bit problematic to have it like this full automation way. But where the crew plugin is awesome is kind of, as I put it, is like in brackets here, is like technically with the crew plugin you could have like a new OSD wizard, like with, if anyone still installs programs, I would like the nice installation wizards which go like, hey, where do you want the software to be installed? Which features do you want to install? You know, this is kind of how I see it with the crew plugin. Like the crew plugin is more of this simply interactive tool to like get input from the user, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I think all that makes sense to me. Also, sort of extending this to what we were talking about a little bit later, or a little bit earlier, rather. We could consider something like a wizard for doing maybe the sort of like, we've talked about kind of like the play install of Rook, where it's just like use all devices, where we don't necessarily recommend people do that in their actual environments, but we like it is an option in the CRD. If we had a like crew plugin command that was just like, you know, quick start, that would just install stuff really quickly and also run like a job or like a daemon set on all of your nodes that would just look at the disks and populate a config map of stuff that could be used, then that plugin could also automatically fill in some details, and then it wouldn't necessarily be on us to make a like constantly running sort of system to do the same thing. It would be fine for it to be like kind of logic that just exists within the crew plugin. Just as a sort of kind of idea, and seeing if there continue to be ways the crew plugin could make the, any changes around stuff like this easier.
By the way, it's not about like removing the crew plugin or so, like making it obsolete as well. It's just about like, yeah, I guess finding ways to like make it, I guess, a bit more native for the Kubernetes side, and then just being able to do like even like a kubectl Rook Ceph create OSD, and like then it, as you said, like then there's like the wizard, all the steps popping up, and all it would do would then just like create a Ceph OSD. Like that's at least how I see it in that regard. Is like that we basically have Kubernetes as this, I guess, proxy, if you will. So this, I want an OSD, this is the volume I want to use, and magic, Rook operator creates the OSD as we specified it.
Yeah, and the way I see that working too with the crew plugin is the crew plugin, it would take input, it would figure out what you want to do, it would see what your existing CRs are, especially the cluster CR if you're adding OSDs, and it would say, oh, now I'm going to update or create the cluster CR so that it will create the OSDs for you. The crew plugin itself wouldn't go like create OSDs or anything. It would just turn around and create the cluster CR, for example, or other CRs, whatever it is.
I mean, depending on which route we want to go, it could potentially be multi-parted, where it sends some request to LVMO, and then once the disk is like created in LVMO, then it puts that into the storage class device sets. And then we potentially start getting users more toward the PVC only kind of future that we envision. It has always felt like a very slow, a slow road to get to that sort of pie in the sky future.
But still, like at least I said with well, I guess how I see this a bit with more like also the perspective on, with I said like this, someone else could sit on top and be like, oh, a new OSD or something like that, or even Rook adding mechanisms to get smart about like replacing disks as an example. That's like,
yeah. The disk replacement is one of the like I don't know, it's kind of one of the more challenging aspects of kind of dealing with a Ceph cluster. Like having some functionality around OSD management in the crew plugin would be pretty nice, I think.
Yeah, and the OSD or the crew plugin does have a command that will remove an OSD today, but if it were to like use that together with wiping a disk and then creating a new OSD on that disk, that'd be really helpful. For sure.
But this might be then things like that we would be able to work on to some degree also as kind of like, I guess you could call it extensions then, like having something that like watches for the new disk on the same node, and it's then like I said, like, oh, disk has been removed, so we need to clean up, and oh, a new disk has been added, and now we need to replace this OSD basically. Well,
yeah, and I guess to be clear in terminology too, for replacing an OSD in Ceph, I think means something specific where they try and have the same OSD ID and all of that. So usually in Rook, we just say, remove the old one, create a new one. And there's no, or it's just not considered a technical replacement from Ceph's perspective. Just to remove it and add.
Yeah, I guess I'm not entirely sure what the benefits are of quote unquote, replacing an OSD versus just allowing a new OSD to be created in the old one's place.
Right. I think there's just something about PGs not moving as much. Something related to that. I don't remember
Okay.
for sure.
It might also just be that at least I personally would like to have no gaps, between the OSD ID.
Yeah. Where it's
Maybe
like,
it
oh
doesn't
no.
just be that part, but like, even if it would create like a new one, but yeah, well,
Yeah. Well, when you do remove and then add a new OSD, Ceph will give back the next OSD that fills in gaps too. So as long as you add new OSD, it'll fill that gap pretty quick.
yeah.
Great. I got the next slide yet?
Yeah, well, I just tried to, I guess, scribble up a little bit of like, I didn't really have too much of an idea on how like a Ceph OSD could look like, as the YAML structure at the moment. Yeah, I don't know. This would be something up for debate for later on, I think. But maybe like let's just skip to the next slide. I think this is one of those points where, like, as you said, with like if it would be like a read-only access of like, again, I also like this question of should like a CRD exist for like every Ceph daemon then? Should it be like maybe then just read-only for Cephmon and Ceph Manager representing the daemon with like the current status of itself? But for the OSDs, it would make sense of like you can see what its status is, but also create ones by just creating a Ceph OSD object with the right option specified.
I see. So you're saying for like the monitor manager CRD that Rook would create them just for status purposes. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's the kind of the read access part. Exactly. So if you would run like kubectl get Cephmon, you would get, for example, like ABC and see like some, I guess, details about them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
And
as an idea, it's more or less just as it's like throwing out ideas, things I have around that.
Yeah, I'm still, I think, trying to parse this one. Like we can use PBCs for the mon map data and stuff like that. Are you talking about something? Yeah, it was Lady. She had some stuff to say. I think she's annoyed that she's trying to sleep on my lap and I'm talking.
You know how it goes. You're never able to stand up till the cat leaves.
I know. Well, now she's left, so I can finally get
well.
breakfast. But yeah, I guess is this I guess I'm trying to just kind of flesh out this idea in my mind a little more. Like, would Cephmons have access to read CRDs? Is that kind of the idea, or
for the mons to read the CRDs?
Yeah.
Alexander can clarify. I was thinking it was just more for the admin to be able to see status of the cluster, but the mons wouldn't do anything with the CRD.
Oh.
Yeah, it's just a pure status, like that's kind of the read access there. It's just like a pure status kind of view into those components. For example, if like a mon would be unavailable for whatever reason, the operator could like set the status of this object and it appears in like a column when you do kubectl get Cephmon of like time to fail over, I guess, as an example.
Right. I see. So it effectively would be a CRD that contains nothing except a status element.
Yeah. I think there was like a way called aggregated API source or something even differently called, where you could just have like virtual objects injected into like kubectl get events, responses. But I think it's just easier for us to create an object and update it like every 10 seconds or so, or whatever, like time insert here where it makes sense to update such an object with the latest status.
I see. Okay. I am on the same page now, I think.
Yep.
And we do have a lot of status already on the clusters CR, which can always be added to. but yeah, that's a good question about if it should be separate, just for granularity.
Right. Yeah. I think we also want to make sure we balance making sure we don't require users to kind of go all over, all over the ends of the earth to get information about their cluster, that we do have, or at least that we continue to have some aggregate information as well.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Next slide, or where are we?
Yeah, next slide. Like, it's mainly just, I guess, what I try to like pull out, like pull apart on the slide is like some way to see the devices on the servers, having like wrapper objects or something, kind of like as on the last slide, and that's like the different. We could just have it like I guess a status only, or like you can create OSDs, or even that like it would then reflect the status of like an OSD. Basically kind of like replicating like the Ceph ADM orchestrator, not Ceph ADM, but Ceph manager at least.
Right.
Thing.
Yeah, I might be looking ahead here. I was looking at the OSDs already. And there's like the question of, is this a mirror of what's in the Ceph cluster? Like, is this just kind of a status only thing like the Mons, or is this a way that we can both create and manage OSDs? I think we could also consider, I don't want to call this a hybrid approach. We could consider that there could be both greenfield and brownfield cases. Something that the cozy like design has done is generally the way that users interact with creating a bucket is they create a bucket request, and then cozy eventually creates a bucket resource that represents that. And users don't normally, users should never actually modify the bucket objects. I'm kind of imagining the, Ceph OSD to be the bucket object, where generally speaking, you never actually interact directly with the OSD. You usually interact with like, I have this definition of kind of what I want, and it does some things automatically. But I can, like the administrator can, if they so desire, create a manual Ceph OSD, which could be a case that we want to help allow users enable a brownfield case where they're like, I have this pre-existing OSD, it has a metadata device, I'm gonna like put stuff in the right places so that it picks that up. That could allow us to have a nicer migration path for users. Like if we had a tool that like looked at whatever an existing cluster was and then created the brownfield OSD. And then obviously like a user, if they were really, really interested, they could create OSD objects manually themselves. I just feel like that's probably a level of granularity most users don't want. But I think certainly like an operator that sits above the Rook operator, like Red Hat has the OCS operator, Core may also have some controlling functionality, some UI, could pretty easily automatically create those objects with, as it desires, and then it has a granular level of control if it needs it.
That would be the idea basically with it, yeah. That like you either have there's something on top that you can just like, for example, with the Ceph cluster is like a kind of with brownfield. Then I see this kind of already as like the brownfield situation. That you say these are the disks I would like to use, or even these are the PVCs or volume claim terms or device sets I want to have created, and all the operator would then just do is like create the correct Ceph OSDs, I guess, underneath to some degree. Yeah.
Yeah,
Just looking at
I
the
think
time,
that makes sense.
I mean, we're about out of
Yeah,
time.
yeah, let's. So if we just go to two more slides, like one more slide real quick here, and I think the game plan is we can ignore that. Idea is that
Okay.
like maybe some way to have like disks being auto replaced, then that it's kind of with the hot plug detection, but then like with then with the Ceph OSD object being cool and all. And at least how I kind of saw it with the Ceph manager having like this orchestration interface. That we raise sorry, that we could basically just like provide the interface to the manager to like be able to talk with the operator as like I think it was intended at some point, I guess. And at least like I get your point there, Travis, that it's kind of like a circular dependency then, but at least how I would see it is like you either would need to create Ceph OSD objects yourself through the Ceph cluster object, or you log into the manager, log into the dashboard, go to OSDs and click create new, and it would just like auto like show you the disks and everything available, and you could then just by creating an OSD trigger the Ceph OSD object creation in Kubernetes, and because of that the operator would then like create everything else needed. So that's kind of like the, I guess, idea to more or less fulfill what the manager orchestrator interface would need from us to allow us doing that, even if it's a bit of a circular dependency if we think about it.
Right.
But at least for
really,
OSDs, this would be quite cool, I think.
I really kind of wish that the Ceph dashboard existed independently of Ceph in a way.
Right.
That it, you could say, I want to deploy the dashboard, and that's the first thing that you can do, versus having it have to exist within the manager. I think that would make, it would make a lot of things.
I'll take my Ceph cluster without the mons, just the manager, please.
Just the manager, please. Yes. Yeah, because then we wouldn't have. I just think it would be a much better design, like for Ceph and for this use case, where then it becomes a lot easier for the admin to like decide what their kind of security risk tolerance is. They can be like, I'm going to do some operations, spin up the dashboard, use the dashboard, and then like bring the dashboard application back down. And because the dashboard application could, in that scenario, be not like running 24/7, there wouldn't be some pod that has access to create and modify all of the resources that constitute a Ceph cluster. Because like that is also kind of one of the issues where if someone gets access to that pod and it has all the privileges to modify Rook, it also has the privileges to modify itself, and it feels concerning to me. I don't know realistically what the concern is. Probably if someone can get access to that pod, they can get access to the mons and OSDs anyway.
Well, technically any pod that has like an admin config or even like a higher privileged one, you could run a Ceph org create basically, or even like a delete command potentially. So it's,
yeah.
Well, were there any other slides? Let's see. Get through this.
Game plan, but we can kind of ignore this. This is more or less like before now, I guess. I got your feedback, but like again, it's mainly this. If we can try get people more into PVCs, or at least showing them already, like, hey, with PVCs it can be like a bit cooler to manage that. And then like adding some new objects there, at least of like a read-only perspective first, and then look into how we can maybe create them, and maybe then look into like even splitting up like logics in the operator, like making the OSD creation independent of, not necessarily independent of a cluster creation, but that a cluster creation technically is just about get a mon running, get the manager running, done. And then the Ceph OSD would be like, oh, cluster is ready, or the mon is ready at least, and start doing its other work. But yeah, like we're 2 minutes over the time. I don't know if anyone needs to jump, but I said, like, at least I hope that I was able to talk about like how I would love kind of to see this us approaching maybe this more cloud native, Kubernetes nativeness, and
Mhm.
yeah.
That's a great discussion. Lots of great design discussions to be had. I think if we, yeah, we'll just continue those offline or, yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, that brought us to the end of the agenda as well. Let's see where the agenda go. Oh, I stopped sharing my screen anyway, but I think that's all we had. So thanks everyone for all the discussion, and I think we'll call it good for now.
Thank you.
So,
Thanks, Alexander.
See ya.
all right. Yeah. Thanks. Talk to you
Bye.
later.